Going.
Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Gretchen Kaiser. I'm chair of the Juneau Commission on Sustainability. And today we have one of what we call JCAP sustainability sessions. The topic is the Juneau Climate and Energy Plans, a refresher. Juneau Commission on Sustainability is a body appointed by the City Assembly, and we are tasked with providing advice to the Assembly on policies, projects, potential grant funding opportunities, all that support long-term economic, social, environmental, and governmental sustainability, or resilience is another way to look at it, of Juneau as a community. JCAS, our acronym, aligns its work with the sustainability goals established by the Assembly each year. One focus of our work is these sustainability sessions. It's an attempt to broaden the knowledge in the community through public education. After COVID disruption in 2020, JCAS is now resuming these public education sessions. You can look for them on the fourth Thursday at noon each month. Our next session, May 27th, will be a solid waste 101 introduction to the key players in Juneau who handle our solid waste. Sessions are recorded and will be found on JCAS website at CBJ Community Development Department site. So getting into today's talk, our panelists include fellow commission members. Anjali Brantham will make a presentation about 30 minutes in length, and then Duff Mitchell and Steve Benke, other commissioners, will handle the question and answer period. And if you have questions, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A. And we will, once the presentation's done, we'll pull up questions and ask them so everyone can hear the question. So at this point, I'm going to turn this over to Anjali.
Thanks, Gretchen. So I'm hoping to just provide a kind of succinct overview of the Juneau Climate Action and Implementation Plan and the Juneau Renewable Energy Strategy. And to be more economical with my words, and because these are the acronyms we use all the time, let's get these out of the way. JRES is the Juneau Renewable Energy Strategy, and JCAP is the Juneau Climate Action and Implementation Plan, and JCAS is the Juneau Commission on Sustainability. I'm presuming everyone on the line knows what the CBJ is. That's our local government. So you might be wondering why talk about these plans now. One reason is because we are planning a new outreach series that's going to unfold over the coming year. We're calling it Juneau Sustainable Futures Sector Series. And this series is going to feature partners and projects and possibilities for achieving the goals that are outlined in the JRES and the JCAP. So before that starts, we want to provide this 10,000 foot view so that the community understands these foundational documents that express our community environmental values and are so central to our fight against climate change and towards energy independence. Moreover, a lot of what we do in JCAS is to advance the strategies and the goals that are outlined in these documents. As Gretchen said, the Assembly looks towards these documents as they set their annual sustainability goals. And on a broader level, we are in a really exciting moment. Just recently, Governor Dunleavy introduced a new bill that, if it passes, will create a green bank for Alaska, meaning that there could be financing coming for these projects. And then even larger than that is the Earth Day announcement of today, that President Biden today announced that our new nationwide goal is that we're going to reduce emissions by 50% by 2030. So we know we have an administration that's focused on climate change and infrastructure. We have this new Green Bank bill. We have assembly members who are engaged. And so it's a perfect time to kind of remember these plans and activate these plans. So I want to mention I'm a commissioner on JCAS, but I'm not CBJ staff. So I'm not speaking today as a local government. And also there are other sustainability related documents that CBJ has, including the comprehensive plan and transit planning and all of that. So I encourage you to, if you're interested, to look those up at some other time. So I'm going to start by talking about the Juneau Climate Action and Implementation Plan, the JCAP. Then I'll talk about the JRES. I'll mention some successes, and we'll have plenty of time at the end, I'm hoping, for Q&A. So let's go back 10 years to the JCAP. And the Cliff Notes version of the JCAP is that it includes a greenhouse gas inventory. There was this inventory that happened in both 2007 and 2010, and this data is extremely useful. From that, it establishes a new greenhouse gas emission goal for the community. And it was the idea was to achieve these reduction goals through energy conservation primarily. And so JCAP established this goal of a 25% reduction in community-wide greenhouse gases by 2032. So now I'll drill down a bit into these points. As I mentioned, the JCAP, the kind of background on this even, back in 2007, the Assembly passed a resolution making Juneau a part of the International Council of Local Environmental Initiatives and Cities for Climate Protection. And as part of this, Juneau had to create some greenhouse gas reduction goals. And so 2009 actually was the first goals that came forth for greenhouse gas reductions. The city created a 1% reduction goal for CBJ and a 20% reduction goal for the whole community by 2012. So the goal was set, but in order to monitor the goal, you had to get the data, right? So CBJ collected fuel and energy data and created a greenhouse gas emissions inventory and the JCAP as part of this process. You know, as the saying goes, if you can't measure it, you can't monitor it. So staff gathered a lot of information about Juneau's internal energy economy. They got energy data from AEL&P, they got fuel data from the local fuel distributors, data from the mines, and from the airport. And from that, they calculated energy usage and emissions that result from that energy usage. And here you can see that in 2010, 75% of the energy that was consumed in Juneau or spent in Juneau came from petroleum products, which were responsible for 92% of our community's emissions. And then at the same time, you can see only 20% of our energy needs were met with electricity, and that electricity is clean hydropower. And so it produced 0 emissions. This pie chart is very useful. You can see that it describes emissions per sector. And if you do some quick math, you can see that transportation back in 2010 was the bulk of our community's emissions. You combine marine transport, air transport, and highway transport, and that's 55% of our total emissions came from transportation. You can also see another big chunk there are buildings. And most of the building related emissions come from how Juneau heats buildings, that is with fuel oil furnaces and boilers. And so the environmental controls in a building and keeping it warm in the winter, main source of building related emissions. So this data is super useful because it helps us to create more targeted reductions goals and strategies per sector. So this is a comparison from 2007 to 2010, looking at the 2 emissions inventories that happened. And I mentioned that back in 2009, the Assembly created that first reduction goal, which was 1% for CBJ. Well, CBJ actually exceeded that, and during that period dropped emissions by 9.5%. And so it could have been partly buoyed by this success that there was a new goal that was created for the community and for us to reduce our emissions by 25% by 2032. And there are targeted actions associated with the different sectors to try to help with these emissions reductions. And so these are really the sections within the JCAP and where the strategies, under which the strategies are listed. There's buildings, transportation and land use, utilities, mining, renewable energy, and food production. And there are 200 actions that are listed within the JCAP to help us meet these goals. In addition to these 200 actions, the JCAP suggests that there are specific goals for CBJ as an organization. It also recommended that we update the emissions inventory every 3 to 5 years, and that we review and adjust reductions targets periodically. So this is an example taken straight from the JCAP of one of the strategies and some of the actions that could help advance that strategy. And this one is I just picked it randomly, really. It's a ride sharing example. And you can see that the idea is focused on energy conservation, and that's reducing the overall amount of fuel that is being used. And energy conservation is really the focus of the JCAP. At the time, the plan said it was to, quote, decrease area-wide consumption of energy in general and fossil fuels in particular, end quote. So the top recommended actions are listed here. These are the things that were deemed to be make the most sense for helping us to reduce our emissions and meet that 25% reduction goal. And as you read these, maybe think about ways that you've seen action done on these in the community since in the past 10 years. There you can see at the top, there are building sector related goals, weatherization and energy efficient building programs, updating building codes, energy conservation at the local government level, federal and state levels, trying to get the workforce that we need in order to make these energy efficiency upgrades and renewable energy upgrades. Supporting pilot projects, education about, I like this, energy efficient vehicles, because it was 10 years ago. We hadn't yet undergone this EV revolution that we're really in right now. So think hybrids at that point. Thinking of transportation, it was also recommended to really boost the use of bikes in the community. Public outreach, dedicating staff time to make sure this was going to happen. And then it suggests that we create a Juneau energy plan. And so that is exactly what happened. The Juneau Renewable Energy Strategy was an outgrowth of the JCAP in that way. So the JRES was approved in 2018. And the JRES provides additional guidance on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and it primarily by boosting our use and our supply of renewable energy. So the JRES at the beginning establishes kind of baseline information about the community, looking at population forecasts, looking at building types and heating usage and transit and transportation trends. It looks at local energy supplies and regional possibilities for development. And so this is a sort of situational analysis that it starts with. And following that situational analysis, the JRES presented two potential pathways forward. There was the do something pathway and the do more pathway. The do something pathway was to stick with the goal that had been established in the JCAP. That is the 25% reduction by 2032. And the do more goal was a new one, and that is for 80% of all of Juneau's energy to derive from a renewable source by 2045. So this, as you can see, is all about energy rather than emissions, but we saw how closely those two are connected in the emissions inventory. Most of the harmful greenhouse gas emissions are deriving from fossil fuels. And with really broad community support, the Do More pathway was adopted. And at this point is a nice moment to remind everyone that within the JCAP, we saw that 20% of our community's energy derived from renewable hydroelectricity in 2010. And so this new goal is boosting that by 60% of 2010 levels. The JRES has three main themes really for achieving this goal. Number one is reducing and transforming energy use, which is essentially continuing with energy conservation. It includes increasing the use of renewable energy, that is, transitioning away from fossil fuels through rapid electrification, and also increasing the supply of renewable energy so that we know we have the energy that can meet these goals in the future. So JCAP had those 200 actions for reducing emissions. And the JRES went through this 5-factor analysis of these strategies and to determine really what were the most bang for our buck, what was going to fast track getting us to this 80% renewable by 2045 goal. And these were the top 4 strategies that, that emerged from that process. One of them was focused on CBJ as an entity, having an energy management program for local government, reducing fossil fuel use in space heating, reducing fossil fuel use in transportation, and boosting the supply of renewable energy. And here we have this press release from just today, looking at the federal level. This is from whitehouse.gov with this new goal that's being announced today. You'll see that it looks kind of familiar. Carbon-free electricity, cutting emissions by supporting energy efficiency upgrades and electrification in buildings, reducing carbon pollution from transportation. So we are, I don't want to say Biden's following our example necessarily, because who knows if he knows what we're doing, but it's really encouraging to see that the JRES is mirrored in this new policy. So just a recap of these climate and energy goals over time. The first goal was to drop emissions by 20% by 2012. The second goal came about in the JCAP, and that was a 25% total reduction by 2032. And now we have the JRES goal, which is 80% of all of our energy coming from renewable sources by 2045. And so the question is, what's going on to help us with, what are we doing to advance these goals at this point? So this is kind of a status check time. It's almost mid-2021, so we're 10 years after the JCAP, we're 3 years after the JRES. How are we doing? So the bullet points you're going to see on the coming slides are some of the actions that were recommended in the JCAP and the JRES. So thinking about CBJ as an entity, it is making some important strides in reducing energy usage and electrifying their functions. For example, just recently in 2020, there was a bond package that passed that includes funding for energy efficiency upgrades at CBJ facilities, public works and engineering, as well as facilities maintenance are incorporating analysis of emissions and energy usage as they plan new projects, including repairs and upgrades to Centennial Hall and fire stations and other facilities. CBJ is installing heat pumps when they can and when practical, including some major projects like the ground source heat pump at the airport. And they're in the process of upgrading all lighting at all CBJ facilities to LEDs, but they haven't yet implemented the energy management program. So that second strategy of reducing fossil fuel use in space heating, we have some really exciting programs and novel programs in Juneau that we can be really proud about. One is Alaska Heat Smart, which the Assembly has funded for 2 years now. It's a new nonprofit organization, and its premise is to provide education and support so people can install heat pumps in their homes. And so the consultants really help you to determine what's the best solution for your home, looking at heat pumps. And at the end of the consultation process, you have essentially a bid-ready document so that you can move forward confidently and install this air source heat pump in your home. They also have the Thermalize Juneau campaign, which is happening right now. And for this, it's a bulk purchasing program, essentially. So it's going to reduce the cost of air source heat pumps and that equipment. The Juneau Carbon Offset Fund is another novel program of Renewable Juneau. And with the Juneau Carbon Offset Fund, people purchase carbon offsets, and that money then goes to install air source heat pumps in lower income family homes in Juneau, replacing the fuel oil burning furnace or boiler. And in the past year, like 2-ish years or so, the program's been around, there's been 20 conversions done in lower income family homes. And one thing is now we clearly have a host of qualified professionals that are able to install heat pumps and do energy efficiency improvements. And there's new construction these days is incorporating heat pumps from the very beginning, and others outside of the Heat Smart and JCAP programs are doing retrofits to their home and energy efficiency improvements. So electrification of transportation, really Juneau's a statewide leader in this. Just this month, we saw the unveiling of Capital Transit's first all-electric bus, and Capital Transit's taking a phased approach. So over the coming years, it will be switching it entirely to an electric fleet. CBJ is looking at fleet reductions itself and purchasing EVs to replace old vehicles when it's practical. And Public Works recently completed the EV charging study, which is going to move forward to help identify where public electric vehicle charging stations should be located in the community. The Juneau Electric Vehicle Association has done a lot to bring public charging infrastructure to Juneau so that we can charge from, Eagle Beach to Eagle Crest. And with their advocacy efforts, we've seen really incredible growth in EV usage here. There are 500 EVs now on the road here in Juneau. There's momentum around the Lemon Creek bike path and improving that. That was forwarded actually as a funding request to the state and the federal government. And when we're thinking about transportation, let's also think about maritime transportation. Dock electrification is something that's widely supported in the community, and it's something that's also supported by the current assembly and would provide shore power to cruise ships, something that many people are behind. And it's important for us to be ready to pounce on opportunities to be able to pay for these things moving forward. That fourth strategy was about boosting renewable energy supply. And that's something that has received less public attention since the kind of beginning of the JRES. There are things that are somewhat in the works and support around. For example, a lot of people are interested in the intertie being finished in northern Southeast Alaska. So as it is right now, Ketchikan to Petersburg are connected, but not moving north. If we had a regional intertie, we'd be able to move energy around the region and also would no longer be a stranded grid. There's also the Sweetheart Lake project, which is a hydropower project by Juneau Hydropower that is under development. And that question there, are all these efforts working? Are we reducing our emissions and meeting these energy goals? And anecdotally, clearly, we are meeting, there are reductions happening. We see all these Nissan Leafs on the road. We see these conversions that are happening. So the short answer is yes, our efforts are working in some way, but we don't know how much. We need a way to track our progress and to establish interim goals for planning and evaluation. We're really challenged to quantify the reduction of greenhouse gases within our community. There hasn't actually been a greenhouse gas emissions inventory done since 2010. So we're still working on that data, which is now 11 years old. Despite many efforts, the local fuel suppliers are now refusing to let us know their fuel sales data. That means that we don't know if there is less fossil fuels or, being purchased within the community. So we really don't, we presume that, hoping that we're decreasing our emissions, but we don't have the data at this point to tell us that we are. JCAS is working on ways that we can kind of fill this gap, and we're working on methods right now to improve our monitoring of greenhouse gas emissions and energy usage. And also the Assembly as a 2021 goal, said that they want to do a follow-on to the JRES that would make a long-term plan for meeting the goal of being 80% renewable by 2045. There hasn't been a whole lot of progress on that. However, we do see real federal funding coming down the pike, and it's important to think of ways that we can use that to really address some of these goals and build our supply and our use of renewable energy. So I encourage you to take a look at these documents yourself. There's the URL right there. That's where the JRES and the JCAP are located. Come and join us at a JCAS meeting. We have work sessions or real meetings twice a month. Also take a look at some of these great local nonprofits that are doing wonderful work for beneficial electrification and education. Alaska Heat Smart, Renewable Juneau, the Juneau Electric Vehicle Association. And really, in summary, we have a really strong foundation on which we can build this sustainable community. And we see strong alignment right now with our goals and that of the nation's new greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals. So this is the time for us to use every available resource so that we can activate these plans and advance our community values that are articulated within these plans. That's all I have to say right now.
That was a 20-minute romp through a lot of information.
Yes,
Thankfully.
that's for sure.
Hopefully it gives the participants a bit of a overview. There's a lot of detail there. And I guess one of the takeaways is that JCAS is working with the Assembly, particularly the Public Works and Facilities Committee, to try to affect, and with the Engineering and Public Works Department, Community Development Department, City Manager, just trying to really have some on the ground actions that work towards these goals of enhancing our renewable energy in the future. So at this point, I am going to pull up questions. And what I will do is just repeat a question that has been submitted into the Q&A, and then Duff Mitchell or Steve or both will take on the question and provide an answer for us all. So the first question that came in is, does the transportation portion of the greenhouse gases by sector include the cruise industry in marine? So I believe that's going back to the pie chart and the marine transportation portion. If so, how was the Juneau portion of the overall cruise allocated?
I'll take that on. As Anjali said, the energy usage and greenhouse gas emission inventory was mostly based on local fuel suppliers, and the greenhouse gas emission inventory that was done in the two that are done in 2007 and 2010 did not try to account for the cruise industry emissions. It only reflected fuel that was purchased in Juneau, and again, did not try to estimate estimate the some Juneau portion of that. And of course, what that means is it really understates kind of Juneau's dependence on fossil fuels, because clearly a big sector of our economy derives from those cruise ships arriving in Juneau. And so at the moment, while the Commission on Sustainability is trying to figure out how to update that 2010 inventory, one of the first big questions is, what is the scope of the energy usage that you're going to be looking at? And so we're going to be reviewing that question. The modern protocols for looking at how you assess greenhouse gas emission inventories for communities give several different, I forget what the term is, but they basically a couple different levels of analysis that looks at different scopes like that. So that's going to be one of the things that we're going to be wrestling with, is talking about whether or not the update should include some kind of figuring in the emissions from cruise ships, as well as the ferries, the jets, and the barges. I mean, those are all obviously things that Juneau depends a lot on. And I hope that answered the question.
And I encourage people to, add in under the Q&A a follow-on question if you want to explore this further. There's another question that came in. I've heard a number of people complain about the smell at the landfill. Ah, yes, the smell at the landfill. The JRES mentioned that some energy options are still being explored. Has there been any talk about implementing a waste to energy program to put the burn off from the landfill to some use?
I can take that question. It's a very good question, and waste resources are a very important and probably going to be growing energy resource as we try to diminish climate emissions, because now we're taking emissions that are being wasteful and being aspirated naturally, or not naturally, but through the biological processes, and try to turn it into something beneficial. The landfill was not set up for methane gas production, and so you have much different flow rates of gas that come off the methane, and that economically impacts the ability to try to make it commercialized. However, I know Waste Management has put flame offs and burn offs, and they've looked at it. I've heard anecdotally that they have done some internal analysis and whatnot, but the problem arises is that the best landfill methane operations come from ones that are planned, so they're putting the right biological or the right amounts of waste in there so that it creates that predictable flow of off gases that can be burned off. That being said, the Juneau Commission on Sustainability has recently looked at, and continues to look at, this community's looked at many options. There's been trash burning. Now you could go to incineration, or you can go to syngas, which is a real high heat, low emissions that produces a synthetic gas similar to natural gas that can then be used. That isn't perfectly zero emissions, but it is a way to not only reduce your product waste stream into a smaller volume, but also can produce some energy options. There's been a lot of technology. The U.S. Army is working on one in a fort in California with a prototype on the syngas. The record right now is mixed on whether it's workable or not. It's been favorable, but whether it can be scaled for other locations, especially a wet location like Juneau, which will have more moisture in its trash, are questions that still need to be answered. The other is plasma burning. Japan has a waste problem in the sense that their land is extremely expensive. And so a lot of plasma burning goes on in Japan, which basically evaporates the trash into a liquefied it's called a vitrification process, and comes out basically as glass as the end product. So while the community is interested, there's also the overlay that the city and borough does not own the facilities, the land of the dump, they're privately. So that adds another layer of complexity to try to find solutions, but nonetheless are solutions we must find. So I wish I could give you a real nice and great answer on it, but I've tried to at least give you the scope of what the problem is and the areas that are being looked at. I hope I've answered the question.
And I guess I would add a couple comments to what Duff offered, is that JCAS we work through a committee process, and we have a solid waste committee. And recently in March, the JCAS forwarded a what we called a backgrounder fact sheet on solid waste in Juneau to the assembly. And it kind of looks at the big picture, what we've got going on, who are the players. And the solid waste committee has taken the next step of working with the Assembly Public Works and Facilities Committee. It's really kind of in the initial stages. So if you're interested, you can double check our agendas, which are posted online ahead of meetings, and also the Assembly Public Works and Facilities Committee. Staffing by the city, looking at some of the aspects of this, is in the Engineering and Public Works Department. So it's kind of a three-prong, also working with the private sector players in this. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, our next sustainability session on May 27th is sort of a kickoff on solid waste. And JCAS is trying to work with the Assembly Public Works and Facilities Committee to lay out a series of sessions where we can begin to educate the community about our situation, and also some actions we all, as households, businesses, government facilities, the whole, the trash is us. So we're going to be doing a series on that. And so with that, oops, I just lost myself. Let's see. A follow-on question on the solid waste, and I will offer this now. I wonder if there is a way to work with Juneau Compost to continue collecting organic waste from the community and divert that from the landfill to more easily assess the viability of waste to energy program. Like you said, it's not a completely perfect and emission-free option, but it could help a bit. And thanks for the answer to the first question, Duff.
Yeah, let me follow up. Matt, this is a good question. The first one was energy related, and now this one is waste reduction related. And they're a bit different, but absolutely. Composting and reusing materials before they enter the waste stream, like recycling cardboard locally or other things, are perfect examples. But Juneau Compost has done a little beachhead of successful, localized, locally supported composting. And I think it is a great way to show the community effort to try to remove organic waste streams from the community. There is efforts, and I think the owner of that particular project would like to expand, and I believe there's a lot of community support. Lisa sits on our Juneau Commission on Sustainability, and she was helpful in the solid waste extremely helpful in the solid waste paper and document that we have been working on. So I would agree with you that it is absolutely an integral part of our future to divert waste in composting uh, and continue those efforts.
Thank you, Duff. We had a request to me, actually, to get this summary, to get the JCOS fact sheet on solid waste. And I confess that I'm not sure yet if it is on the JCOS website. So in answer to the person who asked that, I will follow up on that and encourage you to check back at the JCOS website, which is tucked under the Community Development Department at the city and borough. And if it's not up there right now, we'll try to get it up there ASAP. Next question is, when will a program be implemented to benefit lower income potential EV owners, similar to Alaska Heat Smart benefiting lower income homeowners?
Duff, you want to take a stab at that, or shall I?
Well, you got a little bit of a better understanding on Alaska Heat Smart. So why don't you go ahead and start, and maybe I can follow up.
Okay. There really has not been much discussion about a program that would benefit lower income EV owners. I think there's things potentially in the work at the national level, out of the Biden administration on that. But there are some related things that are in the works. I think that JCOS and there's an effort ongoing through engineering and public works to take a look at a longer term plan for EV promotion in the community. I know that ALMP has been in discussions about how to provide chargers for in rental properties. So there's some discussions going on that specifically gets at that question about how to help do that. I think that for anybody's interested, people who are interested in it, JCOS and the engineering department will be having some upcoming sessions to talk about EV plans, and especially for charging, EV charging infrastructure in the community. So look for those work sessions in coming months.
And Mike, I would just add that, I don't think that there's going to be a program that allows a large dollar amount for lower income to purchase electric vehicle. But what I do see in the future is charging stations at lower income public housing, as well as in multifamily housing. The Energy Independence Act that Angeli mentioned, the Green Bank affords and allows loans to property owners and through HFC to place chargers at lower income housing to at least enable lower income participation in electric vehicles. We did an analysis at GIVA and others and found that the average Juneau household saves the equivalent of a permanent fund check every year in lowering their energy costs that they would normally spend on a gas driven or a diesel driven vehicle. And that's a significant quality of life issue, for people that are at those levels, because an extra $1,000 into their family income over the year, provides great benefits. And so aside from those economics, I can just point out that those are efforts that I think you'll see forthcoming in the future.
And I guess I would just add, and this is not a program, but it may be more of a Juneau market reality. As Duff mentioned, or Angeli mentioned, there's roughly 500 EVs in this community. And some of those early adopters of EVs could very well, I've heard of cases where people have taken their 5-year-old EV and have now purchased a newer one. And so you are going to see some good quality used EVs hitting the local market at a significantly reduced costs compared to a brand new EV. So that may be a phenomenon that grows as we get more volume of EV owners in town. Next question, and this was kind of a global one for you two. What can Juneau do to meet Biden's goals stated today?
I'm going to jump on that one because that one sounds like such a fun one to try and get started on, but we'll probably all answer that one. So one of the, of course, there were a couple different goals stated, but the most immediate one of a 50% reduction in emissions by over the next decade, I think is probably the most challenging and interesting piece of that. And it does tie directly to something that the JCAS and the Assembly have been talking about a little bit, that the Assembly last year at their annual retreat talked about the need to lay out a more specific path towards reaching the 80 by 45 goal that we've laid out, and said that they wanted to identify some more specific interim goals. So I think that's probably the first step. Is here's an obvious new interim goal towards that 80% by 2045. Is I think that there ought to be discussions about whether that's an appropriate goal for a sub goal for the community to adopt for its climate action plan. I'll point out that there, as Angeli mentioned, we started out with the climate action implementation goals, which were a 25% reduction by 2032. And then when the Renewable Energy Strategy was adopted, we talked more about renewable energy. We didn't really focus on the greenhouse gas emissions piece. So there really is probably a need and opportunity to kind of bring those together to update the climate action goals and mesh those more specifically with the Renewable Energy Strategy. And this new national goal seems like a great opportunity to do that. If we really think we can achieve 80% renewable energy by 2045, we ought to be able to figure out how to achieve 50% reduction by over the next decade. So I guess, again, those are things that have not had specific discussion yet about what those sub goals might look like. But again, that ties back into this question of how do you know when you get there? If we don't have a way to keep track of our energy use in the community or to measure those greenhouse gas emissions, it's a little hard to, you can set the goal, but how do you know whether you're getting there or not? So I think that's part of the reason that we've tied those pieces together. We need to figure out how to do that. And I guess as long as I'm at it here, maybe I'll answer the next one.
Well, I wanted to help with Mike a little bit, and then I'm going to turn it back over to you, Steve.
Okay.
Biden's goals, how we can help. Everything that's coming out is clean energy, lower emissions, jobs. There is already notice of federal opportunities on the streets for infrastructure. We're not waiting for the 2.25 trillion to be announced or whether it's going to be 600. There is already grants out there for infrastructure for Juneau to meet its needs. We've done successful with the electric buses, and we need to pursue that diligently because these monies are available, and we got to compete against New York City, New Orleans, Tampa, whoever. But if we don't apply and we don't have the CBJ in our community go after those monies, they're going to go somewhere else. And what I'm reading is, the climate action plans are a requirement for many grant applications. Guess what? Many communities don't have climate action plans. We do. So we're already on first base when we go into these grant opportunities. And so there is things that we can collectively do, whether it's dock electrification, whether it's improving transmission grid and operational controls, whether it's battery storage, whether it's solid waste efforts. There is going to be opportunities, and I think collectively as a community, there's things that Juneau can do to help meet that. So I just want to provide that optimism there, Mike, going forward. And those are some of the things that JCAS and others are looking at. So Steve, I'll turn it back over to you for the next question.
You want me to go ahead and read it, Steve?
Please do.
Okay, the question reads, since petroleum is a hazardous substance, can't we ask the feds to have the local petro companies disclose the amount of these hazardous substance being brought into Juneau?
Well, actually, Duff would be just as good at answering this as I would, but we have looked at some that there is existing information that the Coast Guard requires reporting. Gretchen's nodding her head. Am I wrong about Coast Guard?
Corps of Engineers.
Corps of Engineers. Thank you. Corps of Engineers requires reporting of shipping of petroleum products, so we've looked at that data. But the problem is that it doesn't break it down between the different types of fuels. So we could get some broad general totals, and Duff has looked at quite a bit of that information, but it doesn't break it down by how much of that's gasoline that would be, relevant to our vehicles, how much of it's avgas, how much of it's heating oil, et cetera. So it really isn't, it's not very helpful information. And it's kind of hard to see why the feds would require that unless we could persuade the Biden administration that they ought to require that for everybody to assist in assessing the impacts of fossil fuels in communities.
I guess is another piece to that. The Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation in its spill prevention and response division does have permitting for fuel tank facilities, storage facilities. And I got all excited last winter when I saw something about Delta Western getting a renewal of their permit. And when I kind of dug into it, it turned out it was statewide. So again, some of the data out there is not community-based. So it's very, you can get millions of gallons, as Steve said, but it's not at the level of granularity that we can say, okay, here's our transportation sector, here's our space heating, or buildings. So it's, so your fallback is to use, and as Steve mentioned, with there now is what's called a global protocol for greenhouse gas inventories, and they have some workarounds, if you will, ways to come at some estimating of those numbers. But clearly it's difficult to get the level of detail locally, but we're working on it. I mean, there are ways to. Juneau is blessed in some ways in terms of being an isolated community. So it's not like we're driving to and from Haines or Sitka and that sort of thing, where a lot of communities have problems drawing their boundaries. So work in progress.
Angela, did
I'd
you
like
want
to
weigh
jump
on
in because I was hoping I'd have a chance to answer the Biden question. What can we do?
Go ahead.
So Duff, you mentioned greenhouse gas emissions and energy, renewable energy and jobs, but the other focus of President Biden is social justice and environmental justice. And I think that a way that this kind of goes back to the question about EVs, how do we get EVs in the hands of lower income people? I think that there's a lot that we can do for multifamily housing and low income housing for those that don't necessarily own their homes. Right now, the programs are really focused on those who are home owners, and the poorest people don't own their homes, you know, but they're also the ones that mostly need the biggest relief from these fuel bills. And so I think programs that could target reducing expenses through electrification of heating loads could do so much for advancing you know, economic equity, as well as reducing that 28% of our emissions that came from buildings, the building sector as identified in 2010.
Okay, well, my clock says it's 1 minute to 1 p.m. and I don't see any more questions. So I want to thank everyone who's participated in the sustainability session. And I encourage you to get involved. As I mentioned, our agendas are published by the city, and the Assembly Public Works and Facilities Committee is tackling a number of these issues we talked about today. So tell people about the sessions, and our next one is on May 27th at noon. Topic will be Solid Waste 101. Who are the key players in Juneau?
And Gretchen, if I may, we just had, I noticed that we had some people in the chat, and one of them was Nancy Waterman, a former chair of the Juneau Commission on Sustainability. And Nancy, I want to say thank you to you personally for all the help that you did on the climate action initiatives. And we're sorry that your questions weren't typed into the Q&A where Gretchen was moderating, but I did want to recognize that you raised some good questions, and thank you very much for your work that you've brought Juneau to this day, Earth Day 2021.
Yeah, thank you, Duff, for pointing that. And Nancy, I'll take a look at your questions and we'll see if we can follow up with you. Thank you. Okay, it's time to get out in that sun, get some of that solar energy.
Happy Earth Day.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.